Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. Living in the middle of nowhere was supposed to be peaceful. Our house sat on the outskirts of Coast Bay, Oregon, swallowed by an endless expanse of dense forest that stretched in every direction. During the day, sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered beams, painting the forest floor in patches of gold and shadow. But at night, when darkness settled over the trees like a heavy blanket, the woods transformed into something else entirely, something that felt alive, watchful, and hungry. I was 14 years old when it started, though I suppose I should have noticed the signs earlier. The way the birds would suddenly go silent when I walked home from the bus stop. The strange markings I'd find on trees near our property, deep gouges in the bark that looked almost deliberate. The feeling of eyes following me whenever I ventured too close to the tree line. But I ignored all of it, writing it off as coincidence or an overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night horror movies. It was late September when everything changed. A storm had rolled in from the coast that evening, bringing with it sheets of rain that hammered against our roof and winds that made the old house groan and creak. My parents had gone to bed early, exhausted from their long commutes to the lumber mill where they both worked. I lay in my bed listening to the storm, watching shadows dance across my ceiling as branches swayed outside my window. The house settled into that particular kind of silence that comes after everyone else is asleep, a silence that makes every sound seem amplified, every creak of wood or whistle of wind seem deliberate. I had just started to drift off when I heard it, a knock on my window. Not a tap from a branch or the scatter of rain. This was deliberate, purposeful. 3 distinct knocks, evenly spaced, each one resonating in the darkness like a heartbeat. My eyes snapped open, and I lay frozen, every muscle in my body tensed. The knocking had come from the window directly beside my bed, the one that faced the forest. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my own heart. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Nothing, just the wind and the rain. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a branch after all, or debris caught in the wind. I tried to convince myself of this, as I slowly, carefully reached for the edge of the curtain. My fingers trembled as they closed around the fabric. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there was nothing there, that I was letting my imagination run wild. I pulled the curtain back. Darkness stared back at me. The glass was streaked with rain, reflecting my pale face back at me like a ghost. Beyond it, the forest was a wall of black, the trees mere suggestions in the storm. I pressed my face closer to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the light from my room. Nothing moved out there, just darkness and rain and wind. But something felt wrong. The longer I looked, the more certain I became that something was different, that something about the darkness beyond the glass wasn't quite right. There was a quality to it, a density, as if the shadows had gathered there deliberately, as if they were watching me just as intently as I was watching them. I jerked the curtain closed and scrambled back from the window, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I lay there in the darkness, every sense on high alert, waiting for another knock that never came. The storm continued its assault on the house, but I barely heard it over the rushing of blood in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that darkness beyond the glass. Felt the weight of something watching, waiting. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of gray, I felt a measure of relief wash over me. Whatever had been out there, if anything had been out there, was gone now. But when I finally worked up the courage to look outside in the morning light, that relief evaporated like mist in the sun. The morning was cold and damp, the storm having passed but leaving behind a penetrating chill that seeped through my jacket as I stepped outside. Mist clung to the ground in wispy patches, and the forest dripped with moisture, each leaf releasing tiny rivers of water. Everything smelled of wet earth and pine. I walked around to the side of the house where my bedroom window faced the woods, moving slowly, almost reluctantly. Part of me hoped I would find nothing, just mud and fallen branches and the ordinary debris of a storm. But another part of me, the part that had lain awake all night, knew better. The footprints were unmistakable. They started about 10 feet from the house and led directly to my window, where they stopped. The impressions were deep, pressed into the soft mud by considerable weight. I knelt down beside them, my breath forming small clouds in the cold air. These weren't the prints of a deer or a bear. They were human, or at least human-shaped. Boot prints, large ones, easily a size 13 or 14, much bigger than my father's feet, much bigger than mine. What made my stomach turn wasn't just their size, but their placement. They approached my window in a straight line, deliberate and purposeful. No wandering, no meandering path that might suggest someone lost or confused. These prints spoke of intention, of someone who had known exactly where they were going and why. I followed them with my eyes, tracing their path backward. They emerged from the forest about 30 yards away, appearing at the edge of the tree line as if the person had materialized from the woods themselves. And then, after stopping at my window, they returned the same way, each print evenly spaced, heading back into the darkness between the trees where they disappeared. I stood there for a long time, staring at those prints, trying to make sense of them. Maybe it was a neighbor, but our nearest neighbors were the Hendersons, and they lived over 2 miles away. Maybe someone had gotten lost in the storm. But then why wouldn't they knock on the door? Why come to my window specifically? The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and I suddenly felt very exposed standing there. The forest seemed to press closer, and I had the distinct impression of being observed. The feeling crawled across my skin like insects, raising the hair on the back of my neck. I backed away from the prints, my eyes scanning the tree line, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and the slow drip of water from the branches. I went back inside and locked the door behind me, then checked every window in the house, making sure they were all secure. My parents were already up, moving through their morning routine with the automatic efficiency of people who had done the same thing every day for 20 years. My mother was making coffee, and my father was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. "You're up early," my mother said, glancing at me as I entered the kitchen. "Couldn't sleep?" I wanted to tell them. I wanted to show them the prints, to explain about the knocking, to share the fear that had coiled in my gut like a living thing. But looking at them now, in the ordinary light of morning, with coffee brewing and toast in the toaster, and the radio playing softly in the background, I couldn't find the words. How could I explain that feeling of being watched? How could I make them understand the wrongness I had felt staring into that darkness beyond my window? "Storm kept me awake," I said instead, pouring myself a glass of orange juice. "It was a loud one," my father agreed, not looking up from his paper. "Knocked down some branches in the driveway. I'll need to clear them before I leave for work." The conversation moved on to ordinary things. My mother's schedule at the mill, my upcoming science test, whether we needed milk from the store. Normal, mundane details of normal, mundane life. But I couldn't shake the image of those footprints. Couldn't forget that deliberate approach to my window. School that day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything the teachers said. I kept replaying the night before in my mind, analyzing every detail, searching for some rational explanation that would make everything make sense. But no matter how I looked at it, I couldn't escape the fundamental truth. Someone had stood outside my window in the middle of a storm and knocked. Someone had wanted me to know they were there. The days that followed were tense. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every night I would check my window before bed, making sure the curtains were drawn tight, making sure the lock was secure. I started sleeping with my light on, something I hadn't done since I was a small child. My parents noticed the change in me. My mother asked if everything was okay at school, if I was being bullied or having trouble with my classes. I assured her everything was fine, but I could see the concern in her eyes. My father suggested I spend more time outdoors, get some exercise, claiming the fresh air would do me good. But the last thing I wanted was to spend time outside, especially near the woods. A week after the knocking incident, I was skateboarding home from school. It was late afternoon, and the sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The road home was mostly empty. It usually was, just a long stretch of cracked asphalt cutting through the forest. The sound of my wheels on the pavement was rhythmic, almost meditative, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to normal. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the woods, maybe 50 yards ahead, just off the side of the road. Not hidden exactly, but not quite in the open either. positioned in that liminal space between the forest and the road where the shadows of the trees stretched long across the ground. He was too far away for me to make out details of his face, but I could see he was tall, abnormally so, with a thin frame that seemed almost skeletal beneath dark clothes, and he was staring directly at me. I slowed down, my feet dragging on the pavement to brake. The man didn't move. He just stood there, perfectly still, watching. There was something wrong about his posture, too rigid, too unnatural, like a mannequin that had been posed rather than a person standing normally. His arms hung at his sides, but they seemed too long, extending past where they should have ended. My heart started to pound. This was him. This had to be him. The person who had knocked on my window, who had left those footprints in the mud. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to skate back the way I had come, to get away from this man and whatever wrongness emanated from him. But I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the foolish bravery of someone too young to fully understand danger. But I kept going. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just someone out for a walk, that there was nothing to be afraid of. I kept my eyes forward, trying not to look at him as I approached, trying to act casual even as every muscle in my body tensed. As I got closer, I couldn't help but glance in his direction. He had turned now, his body rotating to follow my progress, his head tracking me like a predator following prey. I still couldn't see his face clearly. It was too shadowed, too obscured by distance and the failing light, but I could feel his eyes on me, could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. I sped up, pushing harder on the pavement, wanting nothing more than to be past him, to be home, to be anywhere but here. My wheels hummed against the asphalt, and my breath came in short gasps, though I wasn't sure if it was from exertion or fear. Don't look back, I told myself. Just keep going. Don't look back. But I did look back. He was still there, still watching, but now he had stepped fully out of the shadows and onto the edge of the road. In the dying light, I could see more details. The unnatural length of his limbs, the way his clothes hung on his frame like they were several sizes too large, the strange angle of his head as it tilted to one side, studying me. And though I still couldn't make out his features, I had the distinct impression of a smile, wide and wrong and full of teeth. I turned back around and skated as fast as I could, no longer caring about maintaining composure, no longer worried about looking scared. By the time I reached my driveway, my lungs were burning and my legs were shaking. I grabbed my skateboard and ran to the door, fumbling with the keys, nearly dropping them in my haste to get inside. Once I was in, I locked the door and ran to the living room window, peeking through the curtains back toward the road. The man was gone. The spot where he had been standing was empty, just trees and shadows and the gathering dusk. But I knew what I had seen. I knew he had been there, watching me, waiting for something. That night I couldn't eat dinner. My mother felt my forehead, convinced I was coming down with something. My father told me to get to bed early, to rest up. But rest was the last thing I could do. I lay in my bed staring at my window, waiting for those 3 knocks to come again. They didn't come that night. But somehow, that was almost worse, because now I knew he was out there, somewhere in the darkness, watching and waiting. And I had no idea what he wanted or when he would come back. I couldn't take it anymore. Days had passed since I'd seen the man on the road, but the fear hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown, festering in my mind like an infected wound. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Every sound from outside made my heart race. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate, couldn't escape the feeling that something terrible was building, that whatever was happening was far from over. I needed answers. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, even if part of me was terrified of what I might find. So one evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I made a decision that would change everything. I gathered my supplies carefully, methodically. My father's pistol, which he kept in a lockbox under his bed. I knew where he hid the key, my flashlight, heavy and solid, with fresh batteries. A jacket, even though the night wasn't particularly cold. I dressed in dark clothes, not really thinking about why, just operating on some instinct that told me I needed to blend into the darkness. The house was silent as I crept through it, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a thunderclap in my ears. I paused at my parents' bedroom door, listening to my father's steady snoring, my mother's quiet breathing. They had no idea what I was about to do. Maybe that was for the best. I slipped out the back door, closing it softly behind me. The night air hit me immediately, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest loomed before me, a wall of darkness broken only by the pale light of a half-moon struggling to penetrate the canopy. For a moment I hesitated, every rational part of my brain screaming at me to turn around, to go back inside, to forget this foolish plan. But I couldn't. The fear had become unbearable, and the only way I knew to fight it was to face it head-on. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the woods. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small circle of forest floor, fallen leaves, exposed roots, scattered pine cones. Beyond that circle, the darkness seemed absolute, pressing in from all sides like something solid. I moved slowly, carefully, my free hand gripping the pistol in my jacket pocket. Every sound made me flinch, the snap of a twig under my foot, the rustle of something moving through the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl. I tried to follow the same path I had seen the footprints take, heading deeper into the woods in the direction the man had come from. The trees grew denser here, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy so thick that almost no moonlight penetrated. My flashlight became my entire world, a small sphere of visibility in an ocean of darkness. Time lost meaning. I might have been walking for 10 minutes or an hour. I couldn't tell. The forest seemed to swallow distance, making it impossible to judge how far I had come or how far I had yet to go. I was beginning to think this was a mistake, that I should turn back when I noticed something ahead. A break in the trees, a clearing, or something like it. I approached cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a clearing at all. It was the entrance to a cave, partially hidden behind a thick cluster of bushes and fallen logs. The opening was large, easily 6 feet high and twice as wide, like a mouth yawning in the side of a small hill. My flashlight beam didn't penetrate far into it. The darkness inside seemed to absorb the light. I stood at the entrance, every fiber of my being telling me not to go in, that this was a bad idea, that I should run while I still could. The cave exhaled cold air that smelled of damp stone, and something else, something organic and rotting that made my stomach turn. But I had come this far. I had to know. I took a step toward the entrance. That's when something exploded from the cave with a sound like a scream. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight, my heart seeming to stop in my chest. A mountain lion, a huge one, its golden fur matted and dirty, burst from the darkness and raced past me, so close I could feel the displacement of air. Its eyes were wide with terror, its ears flat against its skull, and it ran as if pursued by something far more dangerous than itself. I stood there gasping, watching the cat disappear into the forest. Mountain lions didn't run from people. They were apex predators, feared by everything else in these woods. What could possibly scare one so badly that it would flee like that? The answer, I realized with growing dread, was inside the cave. I should have left then. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me to follow the cat's example, to run as fast and far as I could. But I couldn't. Something drew me forward. Call it curiosity, call it stupidity, call it fate. I needed to see what was in there. I stepped into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately as I crossed the threshold. The cave exhaled a cold that had nothing to do with the season, a deep, ancient cold that seemed to seep from the stone itself. My flashlight beam trembled as my hand shook, illuminating rough walls that glistened with moisture. The smell was worse inside. That rotting odor intensified, mixed with something metallic and sharp that I recognized with horror as blood. I forced myself to breathe through my mouth, trying not to gag. The cave descended gradually, sloping downward into the earth. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead, each drop echoing with unnatural clarity. My footsteps sounded too loud, each one announcing my presence to whatever might be lurking in the depths. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the walls, dark stains that streaked down the stone like paint. But I knew it wasn't paint. The stains were too irregular, too organic, spreading in patterns that spoke of violence. I didn't want to think about what had caused them, didn't want to imagine the struggles that might have taken place here. I continued deeper, my thumb resting on the safety of the pistol now clutched in my right hand, the flashlight in my left. The cave narrowed slightly, then opened into a wider chamber. My light swept across the space, and what I saw made my blood freeze. Bones, scattered across the floor like discarded toys. Most were animal. I could make out the skull of a deer, the rib cage of what might have been a bear. But there were others, smaller ones, that I didn't want to identify, and among them, half buried in the dirt and debris, personal items that had no business being in a cave. A watch, tarnished and broken. A shoe, small enough to belong to a child. A pair of glasses with one lens missing. These were trophies. Evidence of hunts. Proof of kills. My hands were shaking so badly now that the flashlight beam jerked across the cave walls, creating dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. I backed up, ready to run, ready to get out of this nightmare place and never look back. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the deeper darkness at the back of the chamber, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. But I could make out his silhouette, that impossibly tall frame, those two long limbs, the slight tilt of his head as he regarded me. He hadn't been there a moment ago. I was certain of it. He had simply appeared, materializing from the shadows like something born of darkness itself. For several heartbeats, neither of us moved. We stood frozen, predator and prey, hunter and hunted. My flashlight beam inched forward, illuminating more of him, and what I saw defied rational explanation. He wore what looked like a mask, but it was like no mask I had ever seen. It was crude, fashioned from what might have been bark or leather or something worse, twisted into an expression of agony. The mouth was carved into a wide grimace, revealing what looked like real teeth beneath too many teeth, arranged in rows that no human mouth should contain. But it was the eyes that paralyzed me. They glowed with a deep crimson light, not reflecting my flashlight, but generating their own luminescence, like hot coals burning in the darkness. His body was wrong. Even accounting for his height, the proportions were all wrong. His arms hung down past his knees, ending in hands with fingers that seemed to have too many joints. His legs bent backward slightly, like a bird's. Beneath the tattered remains of clothing, his skin appeared gray and mottled, stretched tight over a frame that seemed composed of nothing but bone and sinew. He took a step forward, and the movement was all wrong. Too fluid, too quick, like watching a film with frames missing. The sound he made wasn't quite a breath, and wasn't quite a growl. It was something in between, something that spoke of hunger and rage and ancient evil. I raised the pistol, my arm trembling so violently I could barely aim. "Stay back," I managed to croak, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't come any closer." He tilted his head the other way, studying me with those burning red eyes. Then he smiled. I could see the mask shift, could see those terrible teeth gleaming in the darkness. He was enjoying this, enjoying my fear. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space, the muzzle flash momentarily illuminating the entire cave in stark white light. The bullet struck the wall behind where he had been standing, sending chips of stone flying, but he wasn't there anymore. He had moved impossibly fast, inhumanly fast, and was now to my left, then my right, then behind me. I spun, trying to track him, firing wildly, the reports of the pistol echoing like thunder. But he was always one step ahead, always just out of reach, moving with a speed and grace that mocked the laws of physics. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of him, a flash of those red eyes here, the swipe of those two long arms there, the gleam of teeth in the darkness. He was toying with me, I realized. He could have killed me at any moment, but he was drawing it out, savoring my terror. The pistol clicked empty. I had fired all the rounds. He stopped moving, materializing directly in front of me, so close I could smell him. A smell of decay and earth and something else, something primal and wrong. He reached out one of those elongated hands, those two jointed fingers stretching toward my face. I did the only thing I could do. I ran. I bolted past him, nearly dropping my flashlight, my legs pumping with a speed born of pure terror. Behind me I heard that sound again, that not quite breath, not quite growl, but now it was louder, more excited, like a predator that had finally been given permission to chase. I ran through the cave, bouncing off walls, slipping on the damp stone, the beam of my flashlight jerking wildly ahead of me. I could hear him behind me, could hear the scrape of those wrong feet on stone, the rustle of his movement through the darkness. He was fast, terrifyingly fast, but the narrow passage of the cave worked in my favor, limiting his ability to maneuver. I burst out of the cave entrance and into the forest, gasping for air, my lungs burning. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran through the woods, branches whipping at my face, roots trying to trip me, the flashlight my only guide through the darkness. Behind me, I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth, closer than should be possible, gaining on me with every second. The forest became a blur of terror. I had no idea if I was running toward home, or deeper into the woods. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to keep the distance between us. Because if he caught me, if those two long fingers closed around me, I would end up like those bones in the cave, just another trophy, another victim. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my hand and rolling away. For a moment I was in complete darkness, disoriented and helpless. I scrambled on my hands and knees, searching frantically for the light, my fingers closing around it just as I heard him arrive behind me. I spun, ringing the flashlight up, and there he was, standing not 10 feet away, that terrible mask tilted down at me, those red eyes burning in the darkness. He raised his arms, fingers spread wide, ready to pounce. And then suddenly, he stopped. He turned his head, looking off into the forest, those red eyes narrowing. He took a step backward, then another. Something had spooked him, drawn his attention away from me. He stood there for another moment, perfectly still, then turned and vanished into the woods with that impossible speed, moving in a direction away from my house. I didn't question it. I grabbed my flashlight and ran harder than I had ever run in my life, until I finally mercifully saw the lights of my house through the trees. I made it back to my house and slammed through the back door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I stood in the kitchen gasping for breath, my clothes torn and dirty, my face scratched from branches, my entire body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. The house was still silent. My parents hadn't woken up. They had no idea I had been gone, no idea what I had just witnessed. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had happened, trying to convince myself it had been real and not some nightmare brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But the scratches on my face were real. The dirt under my fingernails was real. The empty pistol in my pocket was real. Whatever that thing in the cave had been, it wasn't my imagination. I went to the bathroom and washed my face, watching the water turn brown as it swirled down the drain. My reflection stared back at me, pale, wild-eyed, terrified. I looked like someone who had seen death and barely escaped, which I realized was exactly what I was. Sleep was impossible. I went to my room, locked the door and pushed my dresser in front of it for good measure. Then I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. If I was going to survive this, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I needed answers. I started searching, typing in descriptions of what I had seen. Tall creature in woods, glowing red eyes, gray skin, elongated limbs. Most of what came up was useless. Badly written creepypasta, obviously fake photographs. Forum posts from people who clearly hadn't experienced anything real. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a blog post from a folklore researcher, someone who had spent years collecting stories from various Native American tribes in the Pacific Northwest. The post discussed various entities from indigenous mythology, and one section in particular caught my attention. The description matched almost perfectly. A creature born of hunger and desperation, transformed by an insatiable need to consume. Abnormally tall, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. It moved with unnatural speed and hunted humans specifically, treating them as prey. Those who encountered it rarely survived, and those who did were marked by the experience, forever changed by what they had witnessed. The researcher had collected dozens of accounts from different tribes, Cree, Ojibwe, Algonquin, all describing similar encounters. The details varied slightly from story to story, but the core elements remained consistent. This was something real, something that had been known about and feared for centuries, long before European settlers arrived. I read account after account, each one more terrifying than the last. Stories of hunters who never returned from the woods, tales of entire families found dead in their cabins, their bones stripped clean, warnings passed down through generations about certain areas of the forest that should never be entered, certain sounds that should never be investigated. But what struck me most was what the researcher had written at the end of the post. The most disturbing aspect of these accounts is not what they describe, but what they leave unsaid. In every culture that has legends of this creature, there is an understanding that it doesn't merely kill for food, it hunts for sport. It enjoys the fear it creates. And once it has chosen a target, it rarely gives up the pursuit. My hands were shaking again. This thing, whatever it was, had chosen me. It had knocked on my window, had left its footprints in the mud, had shown itself to me on the road, had let me find its cave. It was toying with me, playing with me, the way a cat plays with a mouse before the kill. I kept searching, looking for any information about how to defend against it, how to escape, how to survive. But the more I read, the more hopeless it seemed. Most accounts ended in death. Those few that described survivors spoke of people who had fled far away, who had left the region entirely and never returned. There was no way to fight it, no weapon that could kill it, no place to hide that it couldn't eventually find. The sun was rising by the time I finally closed my laptop, painting my room in shades of gray and gold. I had been researching for hours, and all I had gained was a deeper understanding of how much danger I was in. This wasn't going to end. Not unless I left. Not unless I put as much distance as possible between myself and these woods. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. I went through the motions of normal life, going to school, eating meals with my family, pretending everything was fine, but inside I was dying. The fear never left me. It was a constant presence, sitting in my chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe, impossible to relax. I stopped sleeping in my room. I told my parents I wanted to sleep on the couch because my bed was uncomfortable, because my room was too cold, because of a dozen different excuses that they accepted without question. The truth was that I couldn't bear to be near that window anymore. Couldn't stand the thought of lying there in the dark, waiting for those 3 knocks to come again. But it didn't matter where I slept. The feeling of being watched never went away. I would catch glimpses of movement at the edge of the woods. Dark shapes that disappeared when I tried to look at them directly. Strange sounds in the night scratching at the walls. Footsteps on the roof. That horrible not-quite-breath sound carried on the wind. My parents heard nothing, saw nothing. They continued their routines, oblivious to the horror that was slowly tightening its grip on our home. I tried to tell them. Multiple times, I opened my mouth to explain what I had seen, to beg them to leave, to make them understand that we were in danger. But the words wouldn't come. How could I explain something so impossible? How could I make them believe in a monster when I could barely believe it myself? My grades dropped. My teachers expressed concern. My few friends stopped inviting me to hang out because I always said no, always made excuses, always seemed distracted and distant. I was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The worst part was the waiting. Days passed, then a week, then 2, and nothing happened. No more knocks on the window, no more sightings of that tall figure in the woods. It was as if the encounter in the cave had never happened, as if I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew better. This was part of the game. This was the creature letting my fear build, letting me torture myself with anticipation, letting me wonder when, not if, but when it would come for me. Every moment of peace was just the calm before the storm, every quiet night just the setup for an attack that could come at any second. I started carrying my father's pistol with me everywhere, even though I had no more ammunition for it. Just the weight of it in my pocket was somehow comforting, a small illusion of control in a situation where I had none. I bought a new flashlight, one that was brighter and more powerful, and I kept it with me always. I researched home security systems, self-defense techniques, survival strategies. I was preparing for a war I knew I couldn't win. My mother finally confronted me about 3 weeks after the cave incident. She cornered me in the kitchen one evening after my father had left for his night shift at the mill. "What's going on with you?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "Don't tell me nothing because I know something's wrong. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. You jump at every sound. Are you in some kind of trouble?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the worry etched in every line of her face. She was scared for me, scared of losing me to whatever darkness was consuming me from the inside. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to collapse into her arms and sob out the whole terrible story and let her make it better the way she had when I was young and had nightmares. But I couldn't, because this nightmare was real, and there was nothing she could do to make it better. Telling her would only put her in danger, would only make her a target. So I did what I had been doing for weeks. I lied. "I'm just stressed about school," I said, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "Big test coming up. I'll be fine once it's over." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But what could she do? She hugged me, told me she loved me, made me promise to talk to her if I needed help. Then she went to bed, leaving me alone in the darkened kitchen, staring out the window at the forest beyond. That night, the knocking returned. 3 knocks. Loud and deliberate, exactly like before. But this time they weren't on my bedroom window. They were on the back door, right where I was standing. I jerked backward, my heart exploding into overdrive, the flashlight falling from my hand and clattering on the floor. The knocking came again, patient and measured, each impact resonating through the house like a drumbeat. Through the window and the door, I could see nothing but darkness, but I knew he was there. I could feel his presence, could sense those red eyes watching me through the glass. I ran. I ran upstairs and burst into my parents' room, shaking my father awake. Words tumbling out of my mouth in a panicked rush. Someone was at the door. Someone was trying to get in. We needed to call the police. We needed to leave. We needed to go now. My father, groggy and confused, grabbed his phone and went downstairs. I followed close behind, my mother bringing up the rear, all of us moving through the dark house. By the time we reached the kitchen, the knocking had stopped. My father turned on the back porch light and looked outside. Nothing. Just the empty yard and the dark forest beyond. He opened the door and stepped outside, looking around, checking the perimeter. I begged him not to go out there, not to leave the safety of the house, but he waved off my concerns. Probably just an animal, he said. Maybe a branch fell against the door. But I saw his face when he came back inside. He had found something. I could tell by the way his expression had changed, by the slight tightening around his eyes. He didn't mention it, didn't want to scare my mother or validate my fears. But I knew there had been footprints again. He had seen them. That was the moment I knew we had to leave. This thing wasn't going to stop. It was escalating, getting bolder, coming closer to my family. If we stayed, someone was going to die. Maybe all of us. Over the next few days, I launched a campaign of persuasion. I told my parents I couldn't stand living so isolated anymore, that I needed to be around more people, that the distance to school was affecting my education. I researched other places we could move, found job listings for my parents in different cities, presented them with options and opportunities. I begged and pleaded and argued with a desperation that must have finally convinced them I was serious. My father was resistant at first. He had lived in Oregon his whole life, had roots here that went deep. But my mother saw what was happening to me, saw how the fear was eating me alive, and she was the one who finally made the decision. We would move. We would start over somewhere new. It took 2 months to make it happen. 2 months of packing and planning, of selling the house and finding a new one, of my father securing a transfer and my mother finding new work. 2 months of living in constant terror, jumping at every sound, checking every window, sleeping with the lights on. 2 months of feeling those red eyes watching from the darkness, knowing that the creature was out there, waiting, biding its time. But finally, mercifully, moving day came. I watched as our belongings were loaded into the truck, as our house, that place of isolation and terror, was slowly emptied of everything that made it ours. My parents chalked up my eagerness to help, my insistence on leaving as quickly as possible, to teenage restlessness and excitement about the move. They had no idea I was running for my life. We moved to Colorado, to a suburb outside Denver. A place with neighbors close by, with streetlights and sidewalks, with the sounds of traffic and people and normal life. A place where the forest didn't press in from all sides, where the darkness didn't feel alive, where I could look out my window at night and see other houses with their lights on, proof that I wasn't alone. The first night in our new home, I slept for 12 hours straight. The first real sleep I'd had in months. That was 3 years ago. I'm 17 now, preparing to graduate high school, making plans for college. On the surface, I'm a normal teenager living a normal life. But the memory of those weeks in Oregon never fades. It's always there, lurking in the back of my mind, like a shadow that won't dissipate. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I've heard those 3 knocks on my window. Sometimes I catch myself scanning the crowds at school or the mall, looking for a figure that's too tall, with limbs that are too long. Sometimes I see red lights in the distance and my heart stops, even though I know they're just taillights or traffic signals or the glow of neon signs. I've tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that stress and isolation had caused some kind of breakdown, that the creature in the cave was nothing more than a delusion born of fear and teenage anxiety. But I can't. The memory is too vivid, too real. too detailed to be dismissed as imagination. I've done more research over the years, digging deeper into the folklore, finding more accounts of similar encounters. I've learned that some people believe these creatures are tied to specific territories, that they don't travel far from their hunting grounds. I hope that's true. I hope that by moving to Colorado, by putting 1,000 miles between myself and that forest in Oregon, I've escaped its reach. But I can't be certain. Sometimes I wonder if distance matters at all. If the creature marked me in some way that night in the cave, if it could find me no matter where I go. Sometimes I wonder if it's already here, somewhere in the Colorado wilderness, waiting and watching, biding its time. I've thought about going back, about returning to those woods with proper weapons, with preparation, with a plan to end this once and for all. But I know that's foolish. I know I wouldn't survive a second encounter. I barely survived the first. So I live with the fear. I've learned to function despite it, to push it down deep where it can't paralyze me. I don't talk about what happened, who would believe me? I don't go camping or hiking. Don't spend time in the wilderness. Don't put myself in situations where I'm isolated or vulnerable. I stay in populated areas, surrounded by people and lights and the comforting sounds of civilization. And I wait, because deep down, in a place I don't like to examine too closely, I know it's not over. The creature let me escape. It could have killed me in that cave, could have caught me in the woods, could have broken down our door any of those nights it came knocking. But it didn't. It let me run. Maybe it enjoys the long game. Maybe it likes knowing I'm out here somewhere, living in fear, always looking over my shoulder, never truly safe. Maybe to something that has existed for centuries, 3 years is nothing. Just a moment, a heartbeat, a pause before the hunt resumes. Or maybe I really did escape. Maybe I'm one of the lucky ones who got away, who survived an encounter that most people don't. Maybe the creature has moved on to other prey, other victims, and I'm nothing more than a memory to it now, if such things even have memories. I don't know which possibility is worse, that it's coming for me, or that it's already forgotten me and moved on to terrorize someone else. What I do know is this: the woods are not empty. They're not safe. They're home to things that shouldn't exist, things that predate human civilization, things that see us not as neighbors or equals but as prey. And once you've seen one of these things, once you've looked into those burning red eyes and felt that ancient hunger directed at you, you're never the same. So I'm telling you this now, putting this account out into the world because I want people to know. I want you to understand that the stories aren't all fictional, that the legends have roots in terrible truth. When you go hiking in the deep woods, when you camp in isolated areas, when you venture into places where cell phone signals fade and human presence becomes scarce, be aware, be cautious, be smart, because something might be watching you, something that has been hunting in these forests for longer than our country has existed, longer than our cities have stood, longer than our modern world of lights and phones and civilization has existed to push back the darkness. And if you hear 3 knocks on your window one night, if you see footprints that are too large and too deliberately placed, if you catch a glimpse of a figure standing at the edge of the woods with red eyes that glow in the darkness, run. Don't investigate. Don't try to be brave. Don't assume it's your imagination or a prank or something that can be rationally explained. Just run, and don't look back. Get away from the woods. Get to populated areas. Get somewhere with lights and people and safety. And if you can, leave entirely. Move far away. Start over. Because once it has marked you as prey, once it has decided to add you to its game, your only chance at survival is escape. I hope my story serves as a warning. I hope it helps someone, somewhere, make the right choice when confronted with something they can't explain. I hope no one else has to experience what I experienced, has to carry the fear that I carry. But mostly I hope I never hear those 3 knocks again. Stay safe out there. Be aware. Trust your instincts. And remember, the woods are older than us, deeper than us, and filled with things that we've forgotten how to see, things that haven't forgotten how to hunt. This happened in the 80s. In the summer of 19... I was 35 years old then, freshly divorced and seeking solace in the depths of the Wisconsin wilderness. My name is Ezekiel Bromley, though most folks just called me Zeke. I'd left behind a bustling career in Chicago's financial district, trading skyscrapers for towering pines and the constant hum of traffic for the gentle whisper of wind through leaves. The cabin I'd purchased sight unseen was more dilapidated than the realtor had led me to believe, but I didn't mind. Its worn wooden walls and slightly askew porch spoke of history, of stories untold, and I was eager to add my own chapter to its weathered pages. As I pulled up in my beat-up Ford pickup, loaded down with what remained of my worldly possessions, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was it, a fresh start. The first few weeks were a blur of manual labor. I threw myself into repairing the cabin, grateful for the distraction it provided from my tumultuous thoughts. Each swing of the hammer, each board I replaced, felt like therapy. The mindless repetition of physical work allowed me to process the emotional baggage I'd dragged with me from the city. It was during this time that I met my nearest neighbor, Corinne Bigsby. She lived about a mile down the dirt road with her 2 children, Rowena and Kingdon. Corinne was a sturdy woman in her early 40s with calloused hands that spoke of a life lived close to the land. Her children, both teenagers, had inherited their mother's self-reliant nature. Corinne appeared at my door one afternoon, a steaming apple pie in her hands and a cautious smile on her weathered face. "Thought you might appreciate some home cooking," she said, her voice gruff but kind. "Can't imagine you've had much time for it. What with all the hammering I've been hearing." I invited her in, suddenly aware of how sparse and makeshift my living arrangements were. We sat at my rickety kitchen table, the rich aroma of cinnamon and apples filling the air as we talked. Corinne filled me in on the local gossip, though in a place this remote, local was a relative term. "Not much happens around here," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "That's why most of us came out this way, to get away from it all." She paused, her expression growing serious. "But lately, there's been talk. People going missing in some of the towns further out. Probably nothing to worry about way out here. But, well, just keep your wits about you, Zeke." I nodded, filing away the information but not giving it much thought. After all, I'd come here to escape the dangers and anxieties of city life. Surely whatever was happening in those distant towns couldn't touch me here in my woodland sanctuary. As the weeks wore on, I settled into a routine. My days were filled with continued work on the cabin, exploration of the surrounding forest, and occasional visits from Corinne and her kids. They'd often bring over homemade treats, jams, pies, even fresh venison when hunting season came around. In return, I'd help out with repairs on their property, or lend a hand with particularly arduous chores. It was during one of these core days, as I was helping Corinne chop firewood near the edge of her property, that I first saw it. A figure, distant and indistinct, standing motionless among the trees. I paused mid-swing, squinting against the afternoon sun to get a better look. "Everything all right?" Corinne asked, noticing my distraction. I blinked, and the figure was gone. "Yeah, just thought I saw something in the woods. Probably just a deer." Corinne's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Probably," she agreed, but there was a note in her voice that made me wonder if she'd seen something similar before. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the symphony of crickets and distant owl hoots, I couldn't shake the memory of that figure. There had been something off about its proportions, something not quite right, but exhaustion soon overcame my unease, and I drifted off into a fitful sleep. I woke with a start sometime in the early hours of the morning. The cabin was pitch black, the kind of darkness you only find far from city lights. But something had roused me. A sound? A presence? I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There, a soft scraping sound, like claws on wood, coming from just outside my bedroom window. My heart began to race, pumping adrenaline through my veins. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the flashlight I kept on my bedside table. The scraping stopped abruptly. Had whatever it was heard me move? I held my breath, finger poised over the flashlight switch. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then a low, rumbling growl, so deep I felt it in my chest more than heard it. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite bear, not quite wolf, but something primal and terrifying. I flicked on the flashlight, my hand shaking as I aimed it at the window. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of matted fur and gleaming eyes before the creature vanished into the night. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, I ventured outside, flashlight in one hand and my old Louisville Slugger in the other. What I found chilled me to the bone. Deep claw marks scored the wooden siding of the cabin. concentrated around my bedroom window. Whatever had made them was large, far larger than any animal I knew to inhabit these woods. And there, in the soft earth beneath the window, was a single massive paw print. I stood there, bat clutched tightly in my trembling hands, as the full weight of my isolation crashed down upon me. I was alone out here, miles from help, with something dangerous lurking in the shadows of the forest. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very limits of sanity and survival. As the summer days grew longer and hotter, an undercurrent of unease began to permeate the peaceful facade of my woodland retreat. The incident at my cabin window wasn't isolated. Strange occurrences became more frequent, each one chipping away at my sense of security. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of purple and orange, I sat on my porch, nursing a glass of whiskey and watching fireflies dance among the trees. The chirping of crickets filled the air, a soothing white noise that usually lulled me into a state of relaxation. But tonight, something felt off. The crickets fell silent all at once, as if a switch had been flipped. The sudden absence of sound was jarring, and I found myself sitting up straighter, every nerve on high alert. That's when I heard it, a low rhythmic thumping coming from deep within the forest. It was too steady to be an animal, too powerful to be anything human. I stood up slowly, straining my eyes to peer into the deepening gloom between the trees. The thumping grew louder, closer. Shadows seemed to shift and writhe, taking on monstrous forms in my imagination. My hand tightened around the glass, knuckles turning white. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night, causing me to jump and drop my glass. It shattered on the porch, shards of glass glittering in the fading light like fallen stars. The scream lingered, raw and agonized, before tapering off into a gurgling moan that made my skin crawl. Heart pounding. I rushed inside and grabbed my shotgun. By the time I worked up the courage to venture back out, an eerie silence had fallen over the woods. The thumping had stopped, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I stood there for what felt like hours, gun clutched tightly to my chest, but nothing emerged from the tree line. The next morning I hiked out to where I thought the sounds had come from. I found nothing. No tracks. No signs of struggle. Nothing to indicate that the horrors of the previous night had been anything more than a figment of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard was real. When I mentioned the incident to Corinne during her next visit, her face grew pale. "You're not the only one who's heard things," she said quietly, glancing nervously out the window. "Rowena, my daughter, she woke up screaming a few nights ago. Said she saw a face at her window, but it wasn't human. Too big," she said, with eyes that glowed like embers. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you think it is?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Corinne shook her head. "I don't know, but it's not just here. I've been hearing stories from town. People gone missing, livestock found torn apart. Some folks are saying it's just a bear, maybe rabid. Others..." She trailed off, biting her lip. "Others what?" I pressed. "Others are saying it's something else, something that ain't natural." She met my eyes, and I saw fear there, raw and primal. "My granddaddy used to tell stories about these woods. Said there were things here, old things, that didn't take kindly to people encroaching on their territory. I always thought they were just tales to keep us kids from wandering too far. Now I'm not so sure." That night I double-checked every lock, every window. I loaded my shotgun and kept it by my bed. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by vivid nightmares of glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. I woke sometime past midnight, disoriented and drenched in sweat. At first, I couldn't pinpoint what had roused me. Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the living room. Tap, 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 like a fingernail on glass. Gripping the shotgun, I crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The tapping continued, steady and insistent. As I rounded the corner into the living room, my blood ran cold. There, at the large picture window that overlooked the forest, was a hand. But it wasn't human. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own, with long curved claws that clicked against the glass with each tap. The skin was a mottled gray, covered in coarse, patchy fur. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The tapping stopped. Slowly, so slowly, a face began to rise into view. It was long, and lupine, with a snout full of yellow dagger-like teeth. But the eyes were almost human, filled with an intelligence that made the creature all the more terrifying. Our gazes locked, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that this thing, whatever it was aware. It knew me. It had been watching, waiting, toying with its prey. A guttural growl emanated from its throat, so low it was almost subsonic, vibrating in my chest cavity. Then, quick as a flash, it was gone, leaving nothing but a quickly fading patch of mist on the window where its breath had condensed. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of my room, shotgun aimed at the door, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin settling. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but alive. That morning I went to Corinne's place. I needed to warn her, to make sure she and her kids were safe. But as I pulled up to their cabin, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The front door stood ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. "Corinne?" I called out, approaching cautiously. "Rowena? Kingdon? Anyone home?" There was no response. With shaking hands, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The interior was a scene of chaos. Furniture overturned, claw marks scoring the walls. And there, on the floor of the living room, was a large pool of congealing blood. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This was no longer just a series of strange occurrences, or half-glimpsed shadows in the night. This was real, visceral danger, and I was right in the middle of it. As I stood there trying to process the scene before me, a distant howl echoed through the trees. It was answered by another, closer this time, and another. The woods around me suddenly felt alive with unseen presences, watching, waiting. I knew then that I had a choice to make. I could run, try to make it back to civilization and alert the authorities. But that would mean leaving Corinne and her children to whatever fate had befallen them. Or I could venture deeper into this nightmare, try to find them, and face whatever horrors awaited me in the depths of the forest. With trembling hands, I checked the load in my shotgun. The weight of the weapon was reassuring, even if I doubted its effectiveness against whatever creatures were out there. Taking a deep breath, I stepped back outside. The sun was high in the sky, but the forest ahead seemed to swallow all light, creating a wall of impenetrable shadow. As I took my first step towards those waiting woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking willingly into the jaws of a monster. But I had no choice. Whatever was out there, whatever had taken Corinne and her kids, I had to face it. And so, with fear as my constant companion, I plunged into the darkness of the forest, unsure if I would ever see the light of day again. The forest closed around me like a living entity, branches reaching out as if trying to impede my progress. The pleasant woodland scents I'd grown accustomed to over the past months were gone, replaced by a dank, musty odor that reminded me of decay and stagnant water. Every step I took felt watched, evaluated by unseen eyes lurking just beyond my field of vision. I tried to focus on tracking, looking for signs of Corinne and her children's passage, but the forest floor seemed unnaturally devoid of traces. No broken twigs, no disturbed leaf litter, nothing to indicate that anyone, or anything, had come this way. It was as if the woods themselves were conspiring to hide the truth from me. As I pressed deeper into the wilderness, the canopy above grew denser, filtering out more and more sunlight until I was left in a perpetual twilight. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a clammy mist began to curl around my ankles. Time seemed to lose all meaning. I couldn't tell if I'd been walking for hours or mere minutes. Suddenly, I froze. There, just ahead, was a clearing I didn't recognize. At its center stood an ancient, gnarled oak tree, its trunk easily 15 feet in diameter. But it was what surrounded the tree that made my blood run cold. Bones. Hundreds, maybe thousands of bones of all sizes littered the ground around the oak. Some were obviously animal. Deer, raccoon, bear. But others were unmistakably human. Skulls grinned up at me from the leaf litter. Arm and leg bones formed grotesque patterns on the forest floor. As I stood there, paralyzed by the grisly scene before me, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, shotgun at the ready, but saw nothing but shadows and mist. Another crack, this time to my left, then another to my right. The sounds were coming faster now, from all directions. Heart pounding, I backed towards the ancient oak, desperate for some kind of cover. That's when I noticed the carvings. The tree's bark was covered in crude ancient symbols, spirals, stick figures, and shapes I couldn't begin to decipher. They seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly green light. A low growl rumbled through the clearing, setting my teeth on edge. I spun around, trying to pinpoint its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The mist was thickening, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Then, emerging from the fog like a nightmare-given form, came a creature straight out of humanity's darkest primordial fears. It stood easily 8 feet tall, its body a twisted amalgamation of wolf and bear, covered in matted fur that seemed to absorb light. But its face was almost human, with intelligent eyes that gleamed with malevolent awareness. I raised my shotgun, fingers fumbling with the trigger. But before I could fire, the creature spoke. Its voice was like gravel being crushed, deep and painful to hear. "Ezekiel Bromley," it growled, my name sounding like a curse from its lipless mouth. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. "What? What are you?" I managed to stammer. The creature's mouth split in a grotesque approximation of a smile, revealing rows of yellow dagger-like teeth. "We are the Old Ones," it said, "the first to walk these lands, long before your kind crawled from the muck. We are the nightmare that your ancestors whispered about around their fires. We are hunger incarnate." As it spoke, more shapes emerged from the mist. Smaller creatures, some walking on all fours, others eerily upright, all with the same twisted melding of animal and human features. They formed a circle around me, cutting off any hope of escape. "Where are Corin and her children?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. The lead creature's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. "The woman and her offspring? They have joined us, as all who enter our domain eventually do. As you will, Ezekiel Bromley." With a sinking heart, I realized the truth. The bones scattered around the clearing. Some of them must belong to Corinne and her kids. I raised my shotgun again, knowing it was futile but unwilling to go down without a fight. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your weapons cannot harm us, little man. We are beyond such mortal concerns." As if to demonstrate, it lunged forward with impossible speed. I fired, the blast deafening in the enclosed space, but the creature didn't even flinch as the buckshot tore through its body. Before I could chamber another round, it was upon me, knocking the gun from my hands with casual ease. I found myself lifted off the ground, the creature's clawed hand wrapped around my throat. As my vision began to darken at the edges, I saw the other creatures closing in, their eyes hungry, mouths slavering. "Welcome to eternity, Ezekiel Bromley," the lead creature growled. "Your flesh will feed us, and your soul will join the chorus of the damned that gives us strength." As consciousness began to slip away, I had one last terrible realization. The stories Corinne had mentioned, the tales her grandfather told, they weren't just stories. They were warnings. Warnings that had gone unheeded for far too long. The last thing I saw before blackness claimed me was the ancient oak tree. In my oxygen-deprived state, I could have sworn I saw faces in its bark. Tortured, screaming faces of countless victims who had come before me. Then, mercifully, I knew no more. When I awoke, I was changed. The hunger was the first thing I noticed. A gnawing, all-consuming need that felt like it would tear me apart from the inside. My body felt wrong, twisted and reformed into something that was no longer fully human. I had become one of them, a creature of nightmare, bound to the ancient woods and the eldritch powers that dwelled within. And as the last vestiges of my humanity slipped away, I realized with dawning horror that my torment was only beginning. For in the dark heart of the forest, time has no meaning. The hunger never ceases. And the hunt is eternal. Time lost all meaning in the depths of that primordial forest. Days blended into nights, weeks into months. In an endless cycle of hunger and hunt, my body, once human, had become a twisted reflection of the creatures that had claimed me. Fur sprouted from my skin, my bones elongated and reshaped, and my senses sharpened to supernatural acuity. But the physical changes paled in comparison to the transformation of my mind. The hunger that gnawed at me was more than just a need for sustenance. It was a primal, all-consuming urge that threatened to obliterate whatever remnants of humanity still clung to my psyche. I found myself moving through the forest with a predator's grace, stalking prey with an instinct that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. The first time I brought down a deer, tearing into its warm flesh with newly sharpened teeth. I felt a surge of savage joy that horrified the part of me that still remembered being Ezekiel Bromley. But that part grew smaller with each passing day, with each life taken to sate the insatiable hunger. The others, I could no longer think of them as monsters, for I was one of them now, taught me the ways of our kind. They showed me how to move unseen through the trees, how to track prey across impossible distances, how to use the ancient magics that pulsed through the very earth beneath our feet. I learned of our history, a tale as old as the land itself. We were the guardians of the wild places, the keepers of secrets too terrible for mortal minds to comprehend. Humanity, in its relentless expansion, had forgotten the old ways, had ceased to pay tribute to the dark forces that slumbered just beyond the veil of reality. And so we hunted, we culled, we reminded them of the price of their hubris. But even as I embraced my new nature, a small part of me rebelled. In quiet moments, when the hunger subsided to a dull ache, I would remember flashes of my old life, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the taste of coffee on a crisp morning, the sound of laughter shared with friends. These memories brought with them a profound sense of loss, a yearning for a world I could never return to. It was during one of these moments of clarity that I made a decision. I would find a way to break free from this curse, to reclaim my humanity. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The others would never let me go willingly, and the hunger would not be denied. My opportunity came on a moonless night, when the darkness was so complete it seemed to swallow all sound and light. The pack had gathered for a hunt, our target a group of campers who had strayed too far from the marked trails. As we circled our prey, preparing to strike, I broke away. I ran faster than I ever had before, my new form allowing me to cover ground at an impossible speed. Behind me I could hear the enraged howls of my former packmates as they realized my betrayal, but I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. For days I fled, pushing my transformed body to its limits. I crossed rivers, scaled cliffs, and tore through underbrush that would have stopped a human in their tracks. All the while, the hunger gnawed at me, growing stronger with each passing hour. Finally exhausted and half-mad with hunger, I stumbled upon a small town on the edge of the wilderness. The sight of buildings, of cars, of normal human life, hit me like a physical blow. I realized then how far I had fallen, how much of my humanity I had lost. As I stood there, hidden in the shadows of the forest's edge, I was faced with a choice. I could give in to the hunger, could sate it on the unsuspecting people of this town, or I could fight it, could try to find a way to coexist with humanity once more. The decision was made for me when a young child, a little girl no more than 6 or 7, wandered to the edge of her backyard, peering curiously into the darkness where I lurked. Our eyes met, and I saw no fear in hers, only wonder. In that moment, something broke inside me. The hunger receded, pushed back by a flood of emotions I had thought long lost. Grief, shame, hope. They crashed over me in waves, bringing me to my knees. I retreated deeper into the woods, away from the temptation of easy prey. And there, beneath the ancient trees that had been both my prison and my home, I began the long, painful process of reclaiming my humanity. It wasn't easy. The hunger was always there, a constant companion whispering seductive promises of power and freedom from moral constraints. But I fought it, day by day, hour by hour. I forced myself to remember who I had been, to recall the values and beliefs that had once defined Ezekiel Bromley. I began to approach the edges of civilization, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. I would watch from afar as people went about their daily lives, reminding myself of the beauty and complexity of human existence. Months passed this way, a constant struggle between the man I had been and the creature I had become. Slowly, painfully, I felt myself changing. The fur began to recede, my bones shifted back towards their original shape, but I knew I would never be fully human again. The wildness, the hunger, would always be a part of me. As I write these words hidden away in a remote cabin far from my original home, I do so as a warning. The old forces are still out there, lurking in the dark places of the world. They are patient, eternal, and ever hungry. To those who would venture into the wild places, I say this: respect the old ways. Remember the stories passed down through generations, for in those tales lie truths that our modern world has forgotten. Truths that might just save your life and your soul. And to those who, like me, find themselves caught between worlds, neither fully human nor completely other, I offer hope. It is possible to find balance, to harness the power of the wild without losing oneself to it entirely. But it requires constant vigilance, unwavering determination, and a deep connection to one's own humanity. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across the forest outside my window. Soon the night will come, bringing with it the call of the wild, the lure of the hunt, and as I do every night, I will face the darkness within me, fighting to remain Ezekiel Bromley for one more day. For I know now that the true horror lies not in the monsters that stalk the night, but in the ease with which a man can become one of them, and in that knowledge lies both my greatest fear and my ultimate salvation. As months turned into years, I found myself walking a precarious tightrope between two worlds. By day, I cautiously reintegrated into human society, taking odd jobs in small towns on the fringes of the wilderness. I'd work as a handyman, a day laborer, anything that allowed me to interact with people while keeping a safe distance. But the nights were still a battle. When darkness fell, the hunger would rise, a tide of primal urges threatening to sweep away the fragile humanity I'd rebuilt. I'd retreat to the woods, my body twisting and changing as I ran on all fours through the underbrush, howling my anguish to an uncaring moon. It was during one of these nocturnal forays that I encountered her. I was deep in the forest, miles from the nearest human settlement, when a scent caught my attention. Human, female, afraid. The hunger surged, urging me to hunt, to feed. But I fought it down, curiosity winning out over bloodlust. I found her huddled at the base of a large oak tree, her clothes torn, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long dark hair and eyes wide with terror. As I approached, she scrambled back, pressing herself against the tree trunk. "Please," she whimpered, "don't hurt me. I'm lost. I just want to go home." Her fear was palpable, a scent so strong it made my head swim. The creature inside me roared, demanding that I pounce, that I tear and rend and feast. But the part of me that was still Ezekiel Bromley held firm. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my voice a gravelly rumble that sounded foreign even to my own ears. "What's your name?" She blinked, clearly surprised that the monstrous figure before her could speak. "Meredith," she stuttered. "Meredith Caldwell. I was camping with friends, but I got separated. I've been wandering for hours." I nodded, fighting to keep my form as human as possible. "I can help you find your way back, Meredith, but you need to trust me. Can you do that?" She hesitated, her eyes darting between my face and the clawed hands I was trying to keep hidden in the shadows. Finally, she nodded. "I don't have much choice, do I?" As I led her through the darkened forest, I found myself opening up to her. Perhaps it was the long isolation, the years spent hiding what I had become, but words began to pour out of me. I told her everything, my transformation, my struggles, my constant battle against the hunger. To my surprise, Meredith listened without judgment. As we walked, she asked questions, showing a compassion I had thought lost to me forever. By the time we reached the edge of her campsite, I felt a connection to her that both thrilled and terrified me. "Will I see you again?" she asked as the glow of campfires became visible through the trees. I shook my head sadly. "It's not safe. I'm not safe." Meredith reached out, her hand gently touching my arm. I flinched at the contact, the first human touch I'd experienced in years. "You saved me, Ezekiel. You're more human than you give yourself credit for." As I watched her walk back to her friends, a war raged inside me. The hunger demanded that I follow, that I slaughter them all in their sleep. But there was something else now, a warmth I had almost forgotten. Hope. Over the next few months, Meredith and I met in secret. She would come to the edge of the forest, and we would talk for hours. She brought books on mythology and folklore, searching for any information that might help me understand my condition. More importantly, she brought friendship, a tether to the human world I had thought lost forever. But our meetings didn't go unnoticed. One night, as Meredith was leaving, I caught a familiar scent on the wind. They had found me. The pack was near. I raced after Meredith, terror lending speed to my feet. I caught up to her just as she reached her car, parked on a lonely stretch of road bordering the forest. "You need to leave," I gasped, my body already beginning to shift as adrenaline and fear coursed through me. "They're coming." The pack. If they find you with me, they'll kill you. Meredith's eyes widened in understanding. Without a word, she got into her car and started the engine. But before she drove away, she rolled down the window. "Come with me," she said, her voice urgent. "We'll figure this out together. You don't have to face them alone." For a moment, I was tempted. The thought of leaving this all behind, of starting a new life with someone who understood me, was almost overwhelming. But then I heard them. Howls in the distance growing closer by the second. "Go," I said, stepping back from the car. "I'll lead them away. Just go and don't come back, please." Tears in her eyes. Meredith nodded. As her car disappeared down the road, I turned to face the forest. The howls were closer now, and I could see shapes moving in the darkness between the trees. I let the change take me fully, embracing the monster I had fought for so long. As my body twisted and grew, bones cracking and reforming, I felt a strange sense of peace. I finally understood my purpose. I wasn't meant to rejoin human society, but neither was I meant to be a mindless beast, slaves to hunger and instinct. I was the bridge between two worlds, uniquely positioned to protect humanity from the horrors that lurked in the dark. As the pack burst from the tree line, their eyes gleaming with hunger and rage, I stood my ground. I was Ezekiel Bromley, man and monster, guardian of the threshold between civilization and wilderness, and I would not let them pass. The battle that followed was brutal and primal. Teeth and claws flashed in the moonlight as we tore into each other. I fought with every ounce of strength I possessed, driven by a determination to protect not just Meredith but all of humanity from the fate that had befallen me. By the time dawn broke, the forest floor was stained with blood. Bodies lay strewn about, some still twitching in their death throes. I stood alone, battered and bleeding, but victorious. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, I felt the change begin to reverse. Slowly, painfully, I shifted back towards my human form. But something was different this time. The hunger, the constant gnawing need that had been my companion for so long, was quiet. I realized then that I had found my balance. By choosing to protect rather than prey upon humanity, I had reconciled the two halves of my nature. I was neither fully human nor completely monster, but something in between, a guardian of the borderlands. In the years that followed, I made the forest my home once more. But this time, it was on my terms. I watched over the wilderness and those who ventured into it, silently protecting campers and hikers from the dangers they never knew existed. Sometimes on quiet nights, I would catch a familiar scent on the wind. Meredith, she would come to the edge of the forest, leaving books or supplies, or sometimes just a note. She never ventured in, and I never showed myself. But knowing she was out there, remembering me, understanding me, gave me strength. To those who read this account, know that the world is wider and stranger than you can imagine. There are forces out there, ancient and powerful, that defy human understanding. But also know that there are guardians, standing watch in the dark places, holding the line between two worlds. And if you ever find yourself lost in the wilderness, feeling eyes upon you in the darkness, know this: not all monsters are to be feared. Some of us are here to protect you, to guide you safely home. All we ask in return is respect for the wild places and the old ways. For in the end, the greatest horror is not the monsters that lurk in the shadows, but the monster that lives within each of us, waiting for its chance to emerge. It is our choices, moment by moment, day by day, that determine whether we become the hunter or the guardian. And I, Ezekiel Bromley, have made my choice. I am the watcher in the woods, the protector of the threshold, and as long as I draw breath, I will stand guard against the darkness, a monster turned guardian, forever walking the thin line between two worlds. As the years passed, I continued my solitary vigil in the forest. The seasons changed, trees grew and fell, and I remained, a constant guardian against the darkness that lurked in the shadows. My reputation grew among both the human and supernatural worlds. To campers and hikers, I became a local legend, the mysterious protector of the woods. To the creatures of the night, I was a deterrent, a reminder that not all who were changed chose to give in to their baser instincts. One crisp autumn evening, as I patrolled the borders of my domain, a familiar scent caught my attention. Meredith. But there was something different this time. She wasn't alone. Curious and cautious, I made my way towards the forest's edge. There, In a small clearing, I saw her. Meredith had aged gracefully, silver streaks in her dark hair catching the moonlight. Beside her stood a young man, no more than 20, with her eyes in my jawline. With a jolt, I realized I was looking at my son. They had brought an old leather-bound journal. My journal. As I watched from the shadows, Meredith began to read aloud, sharing my story with our child. She told him of the monsters in the dark, of the thin line between man and beast, and of the choice to become a protector rather than a predator. As dawn approached and they prepared to leave, the young man spoke. "Do you think he's still out there, Mom? Still watching over the forest?" Meredith smiled, her eyes scanning the tree line. For a moment, I could have sworn she looked directly at me. "I know he is, sweetie. Your father made a choice. A hard one, but the right one. He's out there, keeping us all safe." They left a package at the base of an old oak tree. Books, supplies, and a letter. Once they were gone, I emerged from my hiding place. With trembling hands, I opened the letter. "Dear Ezekiel, I hope this finds you well. Our son Caleb is old enough now to know the truth. He understands the importance of your sacrifice and the weight of the legacy you've left him. He's chosen to follow in your footsteps, in his own way. Caleb is studying folklore and conservation, determined to protect the wild places of the world and the secrets they hold. You should know that your story has spread, passed down in whispers and campfire tales. There are others out there like you now, changed, but choosing to protect rather than harm. You've started something, Ezekiel. A movement of guardians, standing watch over the threshold between worlds. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Never stopped being proud of the choice you made. Our time together was brief, but it changed both our lives forever. Stay safe, my love. Keep watching. Keep protecting. Always. Meredith." As I finished reading, I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with my supernatural nature. For the first time in decades, I wept, not from sorrow or regret, but from a profound sense of peace and purpose. I realized then that my journey had come full circle. What had once been a curse had become a calling. The hunger that had tormented me for so long was now a source of strength, fueling my determination to protect both the human and natural worlds. As the first light of dawn broke over the trees, I made my way back into the heart of the forest. There would always be darkness, always be monsters lurking in the shadows, but there would also always be guardians, standing firm against the night. And I, Ezekiel Bromley, man and monster, father and protector, would continue to walk the thin line between worlds. For in that liminal space I had found not just purpose, but redemption. To those who would follow in my footsteps, I leave this warning and this hope. The choice between light and darkness lies within each of us. Choose wisely, stand firm, and know that in guarding others, you may just save yourself. For in the end, the greatest victory over the monsters of this world is not to destroy them, but to refuse to become them. In that refusal, in that daily choice to protect rather than prey, lies the truest form of humanity. And so as the sun rises on another day, I return to my vigil. The forest calls, and I answer, as I always have and always will. For I am the watcher in the woods, the guardian of the threshold, forever walking the thin line between two worlds. My name is Hernan Gutierrez, and I am 32 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on a camping trip in the summer of 1994. I was out in an RV with my old college buddy Sam Driscoll. We had decided to take a break from our hectic lives and head out to the Ozarks in Arkansas. Sam and I go way back, and we thought a week away from everything would do us some good. The old RV we were traveling in was a beat-up Winnebago that we had pooled money together for back in our 20s. We'd used it for countless trips over the years, but this trip was different. As we set out from Little Rock early that June morning, the air was already thick with humidity. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Sam was behind the wheel, his hands gripping it tightly as we navigated the winding roads leading into the Ozark Mountains. "You remember the last time we were out here?" Sam asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. I chuckled, memories flooding back. How could I forget? That was the trip where you insisted on trying to catch our dinner and ended up with poison ivy all over your hands. Sam groaned, but I could see the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Don't remind me. I couldn't stop itching for weeks. As we drove deeper into the Ozarks, the scenery changed. The flat farmlands gave way to rolling hills, which in turn became steeper, more rugged terrain. Trees crowded the sides of the road, their branches stretching out overhead like gnarled fingers. We had chosen a campsite deep in the heart of the Ozark National Forest. It was a place we had never been before, recommended by a colleague of mine who swore by its secluded beauty. As we turned off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved track, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. "You sure this is the right way?" I asked, peering out the windshield at the increasingly dense forest. Sam nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. According to the map, it should be just a few more miles. The RV groaned as it navigated the rough terrain. Branches scraped against the sides, and more than once we had to stop to move fallen logs out of our path. By the time we finally arrived at the campsite, it was well into the afternoon. The clearing was smaller than I had expected, barely large enough for our RV and a small area for a campfire. Dense forest pressed in on all sides, the trees so tall they seemed to block out most of the sky. Despite the claustrophobic feeling, there was an undeniable beauty to the place. Wildflowers dotted the edges of the clearing, and I could hear the faint sound of running water nearby. "Well," Sam said, turning off the engine and leaning back in his seat. "We made it." I nodded, taking in our surroundings. "Looks like we've got the place to ourselves." We set about making camp, falling into the familiar routine we had developed over years of trips together. Sam took care of setting up the awning and chairs outside the RV, while I gathered wood for a fire. As I ventured to the edge of the clearing to collect fallen branches, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was never anything there, just the endless sea of trees. By the time we had everything set up, the sun was beginning to set. We sat around the newly lit campfire, cracking open a couple of beers and letting the stress of the journey melt away. "You know," Sam said, taking a long pull from his bottle, "I haven't been out camping in years. It feels good to be back in nature." I nodded in agreement, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows on our faces. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I forget how much I miss this until I'm out here again." As night fell, the forest came alive with sound. Crickets chirped incessantly, and somewhere in the distance an owl hooted. We stayed up late, talking about old times and catching up on each other's lives. It was well past midnight when we finally turned in, crawling into our sleeping bags in the RV. That first night passed uneventfully. The gentle sounds of the forest lulled us to sleep, and I woke the next morning feeling refreshed and at peace. Little did I know, it would be the last truly peaceful night of our trip. The second day of our camping trip started innocently enough. We woke late, enjoying the luxury of not having to rush to work or deal with the usual pressures of daily life. After a leisurely breakfast of bacon and eggs cooked over the campfire, we decided to explore our surroundings. A narrow trail led away from our campsite, winding its way deeper into the forest. We followed it, our footsteps muffled by a thick carpet of pine needles. The air was cool beneath the canopy of trees, filled with the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. "You hear that?" Sam asked suddenly, stopping in his tracks. I paused, listening intently. At first I heard nothing but the usual forest sounds, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bird call. But then I caught it, a faint sound, almost like whispers. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Sam. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was no wind, not even a breeze. We pressed on, but the sound seemed to follow us, always just at the edge of hearing. Sometimes it seemed to come from behind us, sometimes from ahead. Once I could have sworn it came from directly overhead, but when I looked up, there was nothing but branches and leaves. By the time we made it back to our campsite, we were both on edge. We tried to laugh it off, blaming overactive imaginations and too many horror movies. But I could see in Sam's eyes the same unease I felt. As night fell, we once again gathered around the campfire. The flames danced hypnotically, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. We were quieter than the night before, each lost in our own thoughts. It was then that we heard it, a rustling in the bushes, just beyond the light of the fire. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was probably just a raccoon, or some other small animal. But Sam, he got this look on his face, a look I hadn't seen in a long time. "You hear that, Hernan?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah, probably just some critter," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But the rustling didn't stop. It grew louder, closer. Sam stood up, grabbing the flashlight from the picnic table. He shined it towards the noise, but we couldn't see anything. The beam of light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, revealing nothing but more shadows. "Maybe we should check it out," he said, his eyes darting towards the dark woods. I sighed, not really wanting to leave the warmth of the fire, but agreed. We both grabbed flashlights and headed towards the noise. As we got closer, the rustling stopped. The forest was silent, unnaturally so. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I shook it off. We stood there, flashlights scanning the trees, but there was nothing. No animals, no movement, not even a breeze to rustle the leaves. "Probably just an animal," I said again, trying to convince myself more than Sam. We headed back to the fire, trying to forget about it. But as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I didn't say anything to Sam, but I could tell he felt it too. His eyes kept darting to the edge of the clearing, and he jumped at every little sound. We decided to turn in early, hoping a good night's sleep would ease our nerves. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay there staring at the ceiling of the RV, listening to the sounds of the forest. Every little noise made me jump. Around midnight, I heard it again. The rustling. This time it was right outside the RV. I sat up, straining to hear. Sam was already awake, his eyes wide with fear. I nodded, grabbing the baseball bat I kept by the door. We slowly crept towards the front of the RV, trying to be as quiet as possible. I peeked out the window but saw nothing. Then there was a loud bang on the side of the RV. We both jumped, Sam grabbing a kitchen knife. I threw open the door, ready to swing, but there was nothing. Just the empty campsite and the dark woods beyond. We stood there for a moment, our breaths heavy in the still night air. Then we heard it again, the rustling, but this time it was moving away from us, deeper into the woods. "Maybe we should leave," Sam said, his voice shaky. I nodded, but something inside me wanted to know what was out there. I felt this strange compulsion to follow the noise. I grabbed a flashlight and started towards the woods. "Hernan, what are you doing?" Sam called after me. "I just want to check it out. I'll be back," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I walked towards the noise, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The rustling grew louder, and I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. But I kept going. I don't know how far I walked, maybe a quarter mile, when I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the flashlight's reach. It was tall, hunched over, with long arms that almost touched the ground. I couldn't make out its face, but I knew it was watching me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there staring. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stood there, locked in a silent standoff with this thing. Then it moved, a slow, deliberate step towards me. I took a step back, my flashlight shaking. The figure stopped, then took another step. Finally, my survival instinct kicked in. I turned and ran, not looking back. I burst out of the woods, breathless and terrified. Sam was waiting by the fire, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" he asked, but I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, trying to catch my breath. We decided to leave first thing in the morning. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to be around to find out. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and sleeplessness. Every sound, every shadow seemed menacing. Sam and I took turns keeping watch, though neither of us said exactly what we were watching for. As soon as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we started packing up. We moved quickly, throwing our belongings haphazardly into the RV. The usual banter and joking that accompanied our packing up was absent, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the occasional whispered instruction. As I was folding up the awning, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, in the soft earth at the edge of our campsite, was a footprint. But it wasn't like any footprint I'd ever seen before. It was enormous, easily twice the size of my own foot, and the shape was all wrong. The toes were too long, almost claw-like, and there was something about the depth and clarity of the print that suggested whatever had made it was incredibly heavy. I called Sam over. my voice barely above a whisper. He took one look at the print and his face went pale. "We need to go now," he said, his voice tight with fear. We practically ran back to the RV, all pretense of calm abandoned. Sam jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, but wouldn't catch. Come on, Sam muttered, turning the key again and again. I looked out the window, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it again. The figure from the night before, standing just at the edge of the clearing. In the dim morning light, I could make out more details, and I almost wished I couldn't. Its skin was a sickly pale color, almost translucent, stretched tight over an impossibly thin frame. Its face was mostly hidden by lank matted hair, but I could see its eyes. They were huge, bulbous things, reflecting the light like a cat's eyes. "Sam," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's here." Sam looked up from the ignition, following my gaze. He saw it too, and I heard him let out a small, choked sound of fear. The figure took a step forward, then another. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. "Sam, we need to go, now," I yelled, panic rising in my throat. As if triggered by my shout, the engine roared to life. Sam slammed the RV into gear and we lurched forward, tires spinning in the loose dirt before finally finding purchase. We sped down the narrow access road, branches scraping against the sides of the RV. I kept looking back, half expecting to see the creature chasing us, but there was nothing, just the endless green tunnel of the forest rushing past. We didn't slow down until we hit the main road, the sudden smoothness of the pavement a stark contrast to the rough forest track. We drove in silence for a long time, the only sound the hum of the engine and our own ragged breathing. Finally, as we approached the outskirts of Little Rock, Sam spoke. What was that thing?" he asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I shook my head. "I don't know, Sam. I really don't know." We made it back to my place in Little Rock by early afternoon. As we pulled into my driveway, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We were home. We were safe. But as I looked at Sam, I realized something. The fear in his eyes hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. He nodded, but it was a jerky, unconvincing motion. Yeah, I'm fine. I nodded, understanding completely. "Why don't you come in for a bit? We can have a beer. Talk it out." But Sam shook his head. "Nah, I should get home. Lisa will be wondering where I am." I wanted to argue, to insist he stay, but I could see his mind was made up. We said our goodbyes, promising to call each other soon, and then he was gone, driving off in his own car which we'd left parked in my driveway before the trip. As I watched his taillights disappear around the corner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The days following our return from the Ozarks passed in a haze of normalcy that felt surreal after what we'd experienced. I went back to work, answered emails, attended meetings. But beneath it all, a current of unease ran through everything I did. I kept expecting to see that figure, that thing, lurking at the edges of my vision. Every unexplained noise made me jump. I found myself avoiding dark places, keeping all the lights on in my house even during the day. I tried to talk to Sam about it, but he was distant, hard to reach. Our usual easy communication had been replaced by short, terse phone calls and unanswered text messages. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. It was about a week after our return when I got the call. It was Sam's wife, Lisa. She was frantic, her words tumbling out so fast I could barely understand her. "Hernan, have you seen Sam? He's gone. He went out to the store yesterday and never came back. They found his car abandoned on some back road. The police, they're looking, but they haven't found anything. I don't know what to do." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "When exactly did he go missing?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Yesterday afternoon," Lisa replied, her voice choked with tears. "Around 3 p.m. He said he was just running to the store for milk. When he didn't come back after a couple of hours, I started calling around. Nobody had seen him. Then this morning, the police called. They found his car." I listened as she described the location where Sam's car had been found. It was a back road, not far from where we had camped. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. "Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm on my way. We'll figure this out, okay? I hung up and sat there for a moment, my mind racing. Could it be connected? Had that thing from the forest somehow followed us? Had it taken Sam? I shook my head, trying to clear these thoughts. There had to be a rational explanation. I arrived at Sam and Lisa's house about an hour later. The police were already there, their cruisers parked haphazardly in the driveway. Lisa met me at the door, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She threw her arms around me as soon as she saw me, and I could feel her shaking. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I hugged her back, feeling helpless. "Of course, I'm here to help in any way I can." Inside, the house was a flurry of activity. Police officers moved back and forth, talking in low voices. In the living room, I saw a detective interviewing one of Sam's co-worker. The air was thick with tension and fear. Lisa led me to the kitchen, where we could talk more privately. She poured us both coffee with shaking hands, spilling some on the counter. "Tell me everything," I said gently. She took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose herself. It was just a normal day. Sam went to work in the morning, came home for lunch. He seemed distracted, I guess, but I didn't think much of it. He's been like that ever since you guys got back from your camping trip. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. Around 3, he said we were out of milk. He was going to run to the store. I offered to go instead, but he insisted. Said he needed some air. That was the last time I saw him. Her voice broke on the last word, and she had to take a moment before continuing. When he didn't come back after a couple of hours, I started to worry. I called his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called around to his friends, but no one had seen him. This morning, the police called. They found his car abandoned on Old Mill Road. That's about 20 miles from here, in the direction of where you guys went camping. I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. Old Mill Road. I knew it. It was one of the roads we had taken on our way to the campsite. Was there any sign of a struggle? I asked, dreading the answer. Lisa shook her head. No, that's the strange thing. The car was just parked on the side of the road. The keys were still in the ignition. His wallet and phone were on the seat. It's like he just vanished. I nodded, trying to process this information. It didn't make sense. Why would Sam drive out there? And what could have happened to make him abandon his car? Just then, one of the detectives entered the kitchen. He was a tall man with graying hair and a grim expression. "Mrs. Driscoll, we'd like to ask you a few more questions if that's all right," he said. Lisa nodded, standing up. She turned to me. "Hernan, would you mind staying?" "Of course," I said. "I'll be right here." As Lisa followed the detective out of the kitchen, I sat there, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sam's disappearance was somehow connected to what we had experienced in the Ozarks. But how could I explain that to the police? They'd think I was crazy. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my recent calls. There, a week ago, was my last conversation with Sam. I hit play, hoping to hear something, anything that might give me a clue. Sam's voice came through the speaker, low and tense. "Hernan, I can't shake this feeling. It's like we brought something back with us. I keep seeing things, shadows moving where they shouldn't be. And the noises. God, the noises. I think it's watching me, Hernan. I think it followed us home." The message ended abruptly. I sat there, stunned. I remembered this call, but I hadn't taken it seriously at the time. I had chalked it up to stress, to the lingering effects of our frightening experience. But now, I looked up to see Lisa standing in the doorway, her face pale. "Hernan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened out there in the woods?" The next few days were a blur of police interviews, search parties, and sleepless nights. I told the police everything I could about our camping trip, leaving out the more unexplainable parts. I described the campsite, the surrounding area, anything I thought might help them find Sam. But as the days stretched into a week, then 2, hope began to fade. The police search turned up nothing. No traces of Sam, no clues to his whereabouts. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this, that what we had encountered in the woods was somehow responsible. But how could I explain that to anyone? Who would believe me? It was about 3 weeks after Sam's disappearance that I made a decision. If the police couldn't find him, I would. I owed it to Sam, to Lisa, to at least try. I started by revisiting the campsite. The drive out there was tense, every mile bringing back memories of our ill-fated trip. As I turned onto the narrow access road, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer. The campsite looked much as we had left it. Our hasty departure had left signs of our presence. A forgotten camp chair, an empty beer can. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. There, in the soft earth near where we had parked the RV, were footprints. The same impossibly large, claw-like prints I had seen the morning we fled. But these were fresh, couldn't have been more than a day or two old. I felt my heart racing as I realized the implications. Whatever that thing was, it was still here, still active, and possibly still hunting. I spent the rest of the day combing the area, looking for any sign of Sam. I found nothing concrete, but there were oddities, places where the underbrush had been crushed, as if something large had moved through. Strange marks on the trees, too high up to have been made by any normal animal. As the sun began to set, I reluctantly headed back to my car. I couldn't risk being in these woods after dark. Not alone, not with what I knew was out there. On the drive back to Little Rock, my mind was racing. I needed help, but who could I turn to? The police wouldn't believe me if I told them about the creature. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, somehow involved in Sam's disappearance. That's when I remembered Dr. Eleanor Reeves. She was a professor of folklore and mythology at the university where Sam and I had studied. More importantly, she had a reputation for being open-minded about unusual phenomena. I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would pay Dr. Reeves a visit. Maybe, just maybe, she could help me make sense of what was happening. As I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around, but the street was empty, quiet in the late evening hour. Still, as I hurried inside, I could have sworn I heard a faint rustling from the bushes at the edge of my property. I locked the door behind me, double-checking every window before I finally allowed myself to relax. As I sat on my couch, the events of the day replaying in my mind, one thought kept circling. What if it had followed me home? The next morning, I headed to the university as soon as visiting hours began. The campus was quiet, most students away for the summer break. I made my way to the anthropology building, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Dr. Reeves' office was at the end of a long corridor, the door decorated with various mythological symbols. I knocked, my heart pounding. "Come in," a voice called from inside. I entered to find a small, cluttered office. Books were piled everywhere, and the walls were covered in maps and strange artifacts. Behind a large antique desk sat Dr. Eleanor Reeves. She was older than I remembered, her hair now completely gray, but her eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. "Hernan Gutierrez," she said, recognition dawning on her face. "It's been a long time. What brings you here?" I took a deep breath. "Dr. Reeves, I need your help. Something strange has happened, and I don't know who else to turn to." She gestured for me to sit, her expression growing serious. "Tell me everything," she said, and so I did. I told her about the camping trip, about the strange noises and the feeling of being watched. I described the creature I had seen, its impossible proportions and unnatural movements. I told her about Sam's disappearance and my recent visit to the campsite. Throughout my story, Dr. Reeves listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Hernan," she said slowly, "what you're describing, it sounds like something I've encountered in my research before. Have you ever heard of the Ozark Howler?" I shook my head. "It's a creature from local folklore," she explained, described as a large bear-like creature with a howl like a wolf. But some accounts describe it differently, more like what you saw. She stood up and walked to one of her bookshelves, pulling out an old leather-bound volume. She flipped through it before finding what she was looking for. "Here," she said, showing me the page. "This is an account from 1834. A trapper described encountering a creature in the Ozarks. Listen to this. It was taller than any man, with arms that near touched the ground. Its skin was pale as death, and its eyes glowed like hellfire in the dark." I felt a chill run down my spine. The description matched almost exactly what I had seen. "But Dr. Reeves," I said, This is just folklore, right? It can't be real. She looked at me over her glasses. Hernan, in my years of study, I've learned that folklore often has a basis in truth. The details may be exaggerated, the stories embellished, but at the core, there's usually something real. She sat back down, her expression grave. What concerns me most is your friend's disappearance. There are other stories, other accounts of people going missing in those woods, never to be seen again. I felt my heart sink. So you think this thing, whatever it is, took Sam? Dr. Reeves nodded slowly. It's possible, but Hernan, if that's the case, we need to be very careful. Whatever this creature is, it's dangerous. And if it's followed you back to the city, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the implications all too well. What should I do? I asked, feeling suddenly very small and very afraid. Dr. Reeves thought for a moment. First, we need more information. I have contacts in the area, people who know the local legends. I'll reach out to them, see what I can find out. In the meantime, I want you to be extremely careful. Don't go anywhere alone, especially at night. And if you see anything at all that seems strange or out of place, I want you to call me immediately. I nodded, grateful for her help, but still terrified of what might be out there. As I stood to leave, Dr. Reeves caught my arm. Hernan, she said, her voice low and serious. Whatever this thing is, it's not just a simple predator. The legends, they speak of it as being intelligent, cunning. If it's real, if it's out there, it might be hunting you now. I left the university with more questions than answers, but at least now I had an ally. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow, every movement in my peripheral vision could be the creature, the Ozark Howler, as Dr. Reeves had called it. That night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard it, a sound outside my window, a rustling in the bushes, and then carried on the night air, a low, mournful howl that made my blood run cold. It was here, in the city, and it was looking for me. The days that followed my meeting with Dr. Reeves were a nightmare of paranoia and fear. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every unexpected noise made me jump. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that pale, elongated figure lurking just out of sight. I threw myself into research, spending hours poring over old books and online forums, looking for any information I could find about the Ozark Howler. Most of what I found was clearly fiction, campfire stories and local legends. But here and there, I found accounts that rang true, that matched what I had seen. One story in particular caught my attention. It was from a hiker who claimed to have encountered the creature in the 1970s. He described finding strange markings on trees, 3 parallel lines, carved deep into the bark. I remembered seeing similar marks at the campsite, but at the time I had dismissed them as normal animal scratches. I shared my findings with Dr. Reeves, who was equally intrigued. She had been reaching out to her contacts, gathering more information. What she told me was disturbing. Hernan, she said during one of our now frequent phone calls, I think we're dealing with something far more dangerous than we initially thought. My sources tell me there's been an increase in missing persons cases in the areas surrounding the Ozarks. Not just hikers or campers, but people from nearby towns. And in each case, there were reports of strange noises, unexplained shadows. You think it's all connected? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I do, she replied gravely, and I think it's escalating. Whatever this creature is, it seems to be growing bolder, expanding its hunting ground. The implications were terrifying. If Dr. Reeves was right, this wasn't just about Sam anymore. This thing was a threat to everyone in the area. What can we do? I asked. There was a long pause before Dr. Reeves answered. I think we need to go back, Hernan. Back to where this all started. We need to find this creature, and we need to stop it. I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. The thought of going back into those woods, of intentionally seeking out the thing that had haunted my nightmares for weeks, was almost too much to bear. But I knew she was right. We couldn't just sit back and do nothing while more people went missing. We spent the next few days preparing. Dr. Reeves reached out to some of her more unconventional contacts, people who dealt with the kind of threats that most of the world pretended didn't exist. They provided us with equipment, specialized cameras, audio recorders, even weapons that they claimed would be effective against supernatural creatures. As we made our preparations, the incidents continued. More sightings, more disappearances, and always that feeling of being watched. More than once I caught glimpses of something moving just at the edge of my vision. Pale, elongated limbs disappearing around corners, glowing eyes reflecting the streetlights for just a moment before vanishing. It was watching me, I realized, hunting me. But two could play at that game. The night before we were set to leave for the Ozarks, I stood at my window, looking out at the darkened street. For a moment, I thought I saw it, a tall, pale figure standing beneath a streetlight. But when I blinked, it was gone. "I'm coming for you," I whispered into the darkness, "and I'm going to find out what you've done with Sam." As if in response, a low, mournful howl echoed through the night. A sound that was part animal, part something else entirely. A sound that spoke of ancient hunger and patient, relentless pursuit. The hunt was on, but this time, we were the hunters. Chapter 8. Return to the Ozarks. The drive back to the Ozarks was tense, to say the least. Dr. Reeves sat in the passenger seat, her eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and the dense forest on either side. The back of my SUV was loaded with equipment. Cameras, audio recorders, motion sensors, and other devices I couldn't even name. As we got closer to our destination, the forest seemed to press in on us, the trees looming over the road like silent sentinels. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was tracking our progress through its domain. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. The clearing looked much as it had when I'd last visited, but there was a heaviness in the air, a sense of wrongness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "We should set up the equipment before it gets dark," Dr. Reeves said, her voice tense. We worked quickly, setting up motion-activated cameras around the perimeter of the clearing and placing audio recorders at strategic points. Dr. Reeves had brought some kind of specialized equipment that she said would detect anomalous energy readings. I didn't fully understand how it worked, but I trusted her expertise. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, we retreated to our tent. It was a far cry from the comfort of the RV I'd shared with Sam on our last trip, but it felt safer somehow, more defensible. "What now?" I asked Dr. Reeves as we sat in the gathering darkness, our flashlights creating small pools of light in the tent. "Now," she said, her voice low, "we wait. And we watch." The night seemed to stretch on endlessly. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made us tense up, our eyes straining to see through the darkness. But nothing came. No pale, elongated figure. No glowing eyes in the shadows. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, when the sky was just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn, that something happened. One of the motion sensors went off, a sharp beeping that made us both jump. Dr. Reeves rushed to the monitoring equipment we'd set up, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "There," she said, pointing to one of the screens. Something triggered the sensor on the north side of the clearing. I peered at the screen, but all I could see was a blur of movement too fast for the camera to capture clearly. "What is it?" I asked, my heart racing. Dr. Reeves shook her head. "I'm not sure, but look at this." She pulled up another screen, this one showing readings from her energy detection equipment. The graph was spiking wildly. "Whatever it is, it's giving off massive amounts of energy, like nothing I've ever seen before." We spent the rest of the day analyzing the data we'd collected, but it raised more questions than it answered. The energy readings were off the charts, unlike anything in Dr. Reeves's extensive database. The audio recorders had picked up strange noises, low, rumbling sounds that seemed to be just at the edge of human hearing. As night fell again, we prepared ourselves for another long vigil, but this time, we didn't have to wait long. It was just past midnight when we heard it. A long, mournful howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound that spoke of ancient hunger and patient, relentless pursuit. The sound of the Ozark howler. "It's here," I whispered, my voice shaking. Dr. Reeves nodded, her face pale in the glow of the monitors. "Remember the plan," she said. "We're not here to confront it. We just need to observe, to gather data." But as another howl split the night air, closer this time, I knew in my heart that our plans were about to change. This wasn't just about gathering data anymore. This was about survival. We stepped out of the tent, our specialized weapons at the ready. The clearing was bathed in pale moonlight, the shadows of the trees stretching like grasping fingers across the ground. And there, at the edge of the clearing, was the creature. It was just as I remembered, impossibly tall, with long gangly limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, fixed on us with an intelligence that was terrifyingly human. For a moment we all stood frozen, Dr. Reeves and I, and this impossible creature from Nightmare. Then with a speed that defied its awkward appearance, it moved. The next few minutes were a blur of action and terror. We fired our weapons, strange energy pulses that seemed to distort the air as they traveled. The creature howled in pain or rage, a sound that made my ears ring and my vision blur. In the chaos, I lost track of Dr. Reeves. I could hear her shouting, but her words were lost in the cacophony of howls and weapons fire. I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. And then suddenly I was face to face with the creature. Its breath was hot on my face, smelling of decay and something alien, something that had no place in this world. Its elongated fingers reached for me, sharp claws glinting in the moonlight. In that moment, as I stared into its glowing eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Recognition. This thing, this monster, it knew me, and not just from our encounter in the woods. No, this was older, deeper. With a jolt of horror, I realized the truth. The Ozark Howler wasn't just some creature that lived in these woods. It was something that had been with us, with humanity, for a very long time. Something that hunted us from the shadows, that fed on our fear as much as our flesh. And in that moment of revelation, as the creature's claws reached for me, I heard a voice, Sam's voice, echoing in my mind. "Run, Hernan," it said. "Run, and don't look back." I didn't question it. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I could hear the creature's howl, filled with rage and frustration. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I found myself back at the clearing. Dr. Reeves was there, her clothes torn and dirty, but alive. "We need to go," she said, her voice shaking. "Now." We grabbed what equipment we could and fled, leaving the rest behind. As we drove away, the sound of howling followed us, growing fainter with distance, but never quite fading away entirely. We didn't speak much on the drive back to Little Rock. What was there to say? We had gone looking for answers, and found only more questions. And something else, a sense that we had brushed up against something ancient and terrible, something that defied our understanding of the world. In the days and weeks that followed, Dr. Reeves and I pored over the data we had gathered. The energy readings, the audio recordings, the blurry images captured by our cameras. We reached out to experts in fields ranging from cryptozoology to quantum physics, seeking any explanation for what we had encountered. But in the end, we were left with more questions than answers. The Ozark Howler, whatever it was, remained a mystery. A terrifying, dangerous mystery that continued to haunt the forests and the fringes of civilization. As for Sam, we never found him. The police eventually closed the case, ruling it a probable accidental death. But I knew the truth, or at least I thought I did. Sam was out there somewhere, lost in a realm beyond our understanding, a victim of forces we could barely comprehend. I still hear the howling sometimes on dark nights when the wind blows just right, and I see shadows moving at the corner of my eye, gone when I turn to look. The Ozark Howler is still out there, still hunting, and I can't shake the feeling that one day it will come for me again. But until then, I'll keep searching for answers. For Sam, for all the others who have vanished into the darkness. Because someone has to stand against the night, against the ancient terrors that lurk in the shadows of our world. And if you find yourself in the Ozarks, or any dark and lonely place, and you hear a strange howl on the wind, run, run and don't look back, because the howler is out there, waiting, watching, and it's always hungry.